Hi, welcome to another Retronaut video. So this is, what would it be? The third or fourth video in the series? I'm not quite sure, I can't keep track. But in the previous video, we did actually get this machine working again. And if you watch that video, you can find that link up here. We found out that the problem with the machine was that mysteriously the BIOS, which is here on the motherboard, that chip there somehow got corrupted at some point when I was either washing it or manipulating it or whatever. I'm really not sure. There was a little bit of confusion about whether this chip here, which is a 32K SRAM chip, was involved in that whole process. But in the end, I worked out with the help of some people on Vogons that the most likely culprit was this chip. And at the end of the day, it required a bit of a leap of faith to try and see if it was working. And I had to flash the BIOS to do that using a built-in, it's called a forced flash procedure. So I followed that procedure. That basically got the machine fixed. When I was testing out this machine last night, it was working then. So hopefully by the end of this video, it's going to be a straight line. We're going to plug everything back in and maybe add a few new things as well. And we're going to end up with a working machine. Fingers crossed. Because I must admit, I didn't expect the BIOS to bite the dust after I washed it. But there we go. That's what happens, I suppose, sometimes. So there's a lot of stuff to go through in this video. So let's crack on. So yeah, the logic board is good. What does the case look like? Well, let me show you first the upper part of the case. And if you refer back to the first video, the link is up there, you would have seen that this case was in pretty sorry condition. It's not in perfect condition now. It's a bit, I would say, sort of smudgy on top. And that's where basically the amount of scrubbing that I had to do to get the marks off has sort of changed the texture of the upper surface of the case. But I would say overall, it actually looks great. There's the side and there's the front, if I show that to the camera there. So yeah, I think this is going to look wonderful once it's all back together. Something I should point out is that it does have these perforations in the side. All of those little squares that you can see here, they're actually perforations which allow air to escape the case. And the same thing on this side. And that's going to come into play later because we need to work out a way to actually cool this machine because the fans took a bit of a beating, unfortunately, during the delivery. So that's the side of the case. Let me show you the bottom of the case. Same deal, I think. Well, there's the bottom of the case, actually, the actual bottom. Let's face it, who's going to see that? But it's clean anyway. And then there's the back of the case, which was, to be fair, in pretty terrible condition. And now it looks mint. The side looks great. So yeah, this is all looking good, ready to have the machine put back in there. So really happy about that. Got to be careful with this, because it has some sharp edges and I've sliced my fingers on it quite a few times. Something that wouldn't be acceptable these days, right? With modern machines. Okay, what else are we going to look at? The power supply. So the power supply, which has electrocuted me twice. I mean, to be fair, they did put a warning on the side. The problem with this design is that it basically has high voltage, 220 volts completely exposed here, which is a bit of a problem. So if your fingers do accidentally wander over here, you can get a shock, which is quite nasty. It does have a fan header in the middle of the board there, which we're not using because we found it to be faulty, but it's not an issue because we actually have a fan header on the board, which we can use instead, and it's perfectly fine. Now, when this machine was new, it had a fan here, and I found that this fan was actually not working when I tested the machine originally. And I actually thought it was a fault with the fan itself, but it looks like it was actually the header that was the problem. So I'd already ordered some replacement fans by the time I worked out that the header was broken. So that's okay. They're Noctua fans. So this is the actual fan that's going to do the job. I haven't converted it yet. It's still got the modern connector on the end there. So I'm going to chop that off and I'm going to put the connector for the original fan on there. There are these two nipples which actually go through holes on here and they have to be pushed in. That's basically how it goes. Then you push it and it engages fully. Unfortunately, the two at the bottom broke when I took off the original one. It's 26-year-old rubber, so it's amazing these survived, to be honest. So what I'm going to do there, basically a low-tech solution, I'm just going to hot glue the bottom of the fan in place. I don't really think it's going to need it. I think these are probably going to do most of the job about holding it in place. Just got to make sure, obviously, that when I do it, that I orient the fan correctly so the air is blowing into the power supply. So that's a job that needs to be done. The other fan has already been converted, but I just need to do a little bit more work on it. Originally, I was trying to recycle this connector, but I don't actually need it. And if you look there, there's always the chance that those two wires are going to come into contact and short, so that's not good. So I'm going to unsolder this. I'm going to put some heat shrink on, and I'm going to resolder that back together. But at the other end, there is a fan header. So this is ready to go. And what I'm going to do with this fan is it's going to go over here on the side of the case, and it's going to plug in here. And what it's going to do is it's going to draw air in through the side of the case, and it's going to blow it onto the CPU and the linear power regulator, which is here. The CPU gets quite warm, nothing crazy to be honest, compared to today's CPUs, but the power regulator is, as I described it in other videos, it's like a room heater. It's amazingly hot. So I think the original fan that was actually in this machine was mainly there to actually cool this down. I'm assuming it needs some kind of cooling, otherwise it's going to fail. So this fan is going to do that. Now originally, the fan was in this orientation in the case, which is a weird design because there's no actual air intake on the front of the machine. So I suppose the idea was that it would just, draw in air from the side and then it would go in through here and then blow this way. So yeah, I'm going to change that now. So it's going to be up against the side of the machine. And the main reason for that is just so that I've got somewhere to secure it. If I find that doesn't work very well, I'm going to try it out without actually, attaching it. If I find that, the side of the case does constrict the airflow too much, what I might actually do is then try and site it back in the original location and try to attach it there. I don't have anything specific to connect this anymore because the original fan shroud got shattered when the machine was delivered. So I'm going to have to make do with cable ties. So I've bought some nice white 2.5mm cable ties, and I'm going to use that to connect it either here or plan A here. So hopefully that's going to work out. So we've got those two fans. And then the next major thing that we obviously have to do to get the machine working is we have to attach some kind of storage device. Originally, this machine had an IDE drive and it was working. But unfortunately, when I tried to back it up using DD on a Mac, it did something to the boot record, and afterwards it didn't seem to see it as a valid device on this machine. I was going to try and persevere with that and try and get it to be restored. But at the end of the day, it had a person's data on it, which I would have to have made an effort to clean. So I thought, sort of ethically, let's just cut our losses and just try and get a new installation of Windows 98. I bought this during the process of repairing the machine in anticipation of copying that IDE drive. This is a compact flash to IDE adapter, and that would actually plug in right here. But then I got into various forums online and they were discussing whether, this had good performance or not. And I looked at the other options. So one option is that you take out this card, the compact flash card, and you can get adapters for adapters. So this is a little bit crazy. You can get micro SD adapters that go into a compact flash card form factor, and they then adapt that micro SD card to a compact flash connector like this. That then plugs into here. This is basically an IDE bus, so it's the same bus design. So what you end up with then is a micro SD to IDE connection. And I've heard it said that micro SD cards have better performance in some regards. So that's one option as well as this one. So we've got three options now: original hard drive, compact flash to IDE, or micro SD to compact flash adapter, and then use the compact flash to IDE adapter. Hope you're following. So those are three options. Then we have a fourth option, which is you can get cards which cut out the middleman and go directly from micro SD to IDE. I have one of those ordered, so we'll have a look at that as well. And then there is a fourth option, I'm sure there are many more, and that is to use some kind of SCSI emulation of a hard drive. I have a SCSI a card for this machine, which I always plan to put in here. So I'm going to test that out as well to see. Now, one thing I've noticed recently is that I was looking at, I think it was Zulu SCSI. Zulu SCSI, I'm finding those cards to be quite expensive now, £70. Now, you've got to bear in mind, I bought this machine for 80 the vendor gave me a discount because it got damaged in transit. So eventually the price of this machine was £60. And I was going to have to pay £70 to get a Zulu SCSI. Now, I appreciate the fact that the people that are making these devices, they have to make a profit. So that's not the issue. But the issue is I don't really want to spend that much money replacing the hard drive. This particular combination here, I think this card, which is a 16 gigabyte card, I think this cost me about £10. And I think this adapter cost me £4. So yeah, £14 solution here. And this would get me 16 gigabytes of hard drive space. Obviously, I could put in bigger cards if I wanted to, but I wanted, probably a bigger solution than this in terms of disk space. So I think, the SCSI thing is going to work out, but I'm going to evaluate it. So before this video, you would have seen another video. I'm going to point to the link for that. And that video goes into which of these solutions is the best solution, looking at the price, looking at the performance, and other, areas of practicality. So I think that's an interesting video. And we're going to use the outcome of that video, the results in this video, to decide which device we're actually going to use, which option we're going to use. So yeah, please watch that video if you can, because when we get to the point where we decide which device we're going to use, that will give you some context so you can understand my decisions. So yeah, the hard drive, pretty complex topic these days because of all the different options we have these days, which to be fair is a nice problem to have. So what else can we do in this machine? Well, it has 32 megabytes of RAM here. This is actually the original 32 megabytes. And I looked online to see how much it would cost to get 2 more. During the repair of this machine, I actually didn't know whether that RAM stick was actually working. So I thought it was a good idea to buy at least 1 more to try and fix the machine if there was a problem with the RAM stick. However, I also thought it was a good idea to get 2 RAM sticks of the same type so that they're matching, 100% matching, so that as long as they did work, they would then be a matching pair in this machine and would, make sure that there wasn't any sort of conflict between, using 2 different RAM sticks of different manufacture. So that's something I think we're going to do. We're going to upgrade this machine to 64 megabytes. I'll just point for you here. This is the built-in graphics card. It's an ATI, let me read this out, ATI 246VT. It's a ATI Max 64 graphics card, which is a sort of bog standard graphics card of this time. It's actually, I haven't actually managed to get it working yet because I couldn't find the correct drivers. So the reason for that was I made the mistake of searching for, I think I was looking for the chip itself, but what I then did was I looked around for cards that actually used it. And eventually I did find a few drivers which looked like they could work. I believe the drivers from a Windows 95, Windows XP would actually work on here. I think they're all the same compatibility. So hopefully we will be able to get the native graphics card updated. But I decided that that wasn't necessarily going to be good enough. So we'll get that working. And then I think we're going to upgrade that to a better machine. And I'll leave it until the end of this video so you can find out what that is. Hopefully you like the choice of graphics card that I've decided to put in this machine. It's a Windows 98 machine. It's from that era, and I'm not going to try and put anything newer on here, the operating system. Basically, Windows 98 would have ran well on this machine at the time. So I'm going to stick to that era, and I'm going to try and stick to parts, which made sense at that time. I did buy a Matrox Millennium card, because that was actually one of the optional cards you could get when you bought this machine. But unfortunately, I made a boo-boo, and it turns out that it's an understandable boo-boo because basically Matrox used the Millennium name for an age. They had many different types of Matrox Millenniums, and the weird thing is, I found that the Matrox Millennium that I have, which is a dual-headed machine card, it can actually drive 2 VGA monitors. I couldn't find the driver for that. I could find drivers for a dual-headed DVI and a dual-headed AGP, but I just couldn't see any drivers that did a dual-headed VGA card. And then the other thing was, I did find a driver that was for a single-headed VGA card, but when I tried to install it in Windows 98, it said that it was the wrong driver for the Matrox Millennium. So yeah, that wasn't working out very well. Now, it turns out as well that the Matrox Millennium wasn't that great a card in terms of gaming. It was a really good productivity card, I think. Had a very good RAM DAC, as far as I understand it, which meant you get a really nice picture from it. And I actually did have Matrox cards when I was working in this era. They were really good cards for doing productivity, dual monitors and things like that. And also high resolutions. They were really good for that. But yeah, I've read reviews and they said that it wasn't so great as a graphics card for gaming, so I've decided to go for another card. And hopefully that's going to turn up pretty soon and we can put that in this machine. As I said, watch to the end of the video to find out what that is. So yeah, that's the graphics card. The sound card, well, the built-in sound is a crystal here. It's a CS42368, I think, or 6B. So that is basically a pretty decent Windows 98 and Sound Blaster compatible sound card. I've read a review of it and apparently it's not amazing. The Sound Blaster support in general is pretty good, but I think the FM synthesis isn't so great. It's built in, it gets me sound. So we'll test it out in some real games and we'll see how bad it is or how good it is. In the future, we could think about replacing it with something better. As far as I know, it does Sound Blaster stereo sound, so it can't be too bad, can it? Should we keep the CD-ROM drive? The CD-ROM drive is here. There it is. It's got this ID cable in the back. It's one of these cables that's been sort of shredded in factory, and that's just to make it more pliable because it's actually very tight in this machine once everything is plugged in. Should I put the CD-ROM drive back in this machine? Yes, Chris, of course you should. It's a Windows 98 machine. If it didn't have this drive, it would be completely crippled because Windows 98 was in the era when the CD-ROM was king. The floppy drive wasn't as important anymore. Video games were coming on CD-ROM because they were now taking up a lot more space. I think at the end of the floppy drive era, you had games on 28 floppies, and you could easily fit a game of that size onto a CD. So that was why CD-ROMs were so important. So yes, this will definitely be going back in the case. Should we put the floppy drive back in? Well, although I said that this is not the floppy drive era so much anymore, it is actually an intrinsic piece of the machine and is actually very important. So I discovered, rather I should say I rediscovered, because I did all this stuff way back in the day, that if you're trying to install Windows 98, you need both the CD-ROM and you need a floppy drive. And the reason for that is because the machine can't actually access the CD-ROM natively, at least as far as I know. But the bigger problem that is that Windows 98 was not designed to actually install from the CD-ROM anyway. So you can put the CD-ROM in, you can tell it to boot from the CD-ROM and it won't do that. It'll just sit there and go, oh, I can't do it. So what you have to do is actually get a boot floppy, pop it in, boot up the Windows 98 floppy. It'll get to a certain point and then say, do you want me to carry on with the installation from CD-ROM? You say yes. It then installs a bunch of CD-ROM drivers to make sure that it can actually access your CD-ROM. When that's finished, it then basically switches over and runs the setup routine on the CD-ROM drive and on you go. So the floppy drive is still actually very important. So that will be going back in the machine, definitely. Serial ports. By this point, pretty legacy. And this is an interesting machine because it's actually in this machine that for, I would say, the first time, not necessarily in the world, obviously, but in this sort of era, we started to see machines with USB. I think USB was invented or at least released in, I think it was 1996. This machine was released, I think, originally in 97. So USB would have been a very new thing, very shiny and unusual, and people wouldn't have known really what it was at this time. What was more normal was to have a serial connector like this. And I believe this goes from somewhere around here and it goes to the back of the machine. And in quite a fancy design it has two serial connectors. There used to be two different sizes, or probably more back in the day, but there was a DB25, I think, and a DB9. These are DB9. And by this point, the DB25 connector had basically gone completely out of fashion. They are electrically compatible. It's just, obviously a bigger connector. And I suppose these were brought in because, they were trying to miniaturize things. So if I wanted to connect this to another machine using serial, which you could use it for doing data transfer, for instance, you can get a null modem cable and you can then transfer data between machines. So it is actually a useful connection. And when I get my PDP connected up and all working, I have a dream of connecting every machine that I have to it over serial. So yeah, that's when these will come in. So yes, the serial ports will go back in. What else have we got? The network card. Okay, so this machine has this rather fancy Ethernet card. It's an expansion card, and this was an optional extra. It's actually got the part number on it from ICL, Fujitsu, and I think it's a 100 megabit networking card. The yellow light apparently lights up when it's in 100 megabit mode, and if it can't achieve 100 megabit, it will then turn off the yellow light to indicate that it's actually in 10 megabit mode instead. So this is actually pretty cool. This actually plugs into a special slot here, and then there's a screw on the motherboard. There's a standoff here that you then use to attach it to the motherboard, and that will give us Ethernet. What's really cool is actually a PCI expansion card, but it doesn't use the slots in the machine because there's only 2 in this machine. But despite that, it actually just turns up in Windows 98 as a PCI device, and we're going to keep that. The machine came with another network card, which I found a bit weird, but I actually checked it out, and it says that it's an N2000 networking card, and it has one of the old fashioned connectors on it. So I think the reason why that was installed was that maybe this machine was used in an environment where that networking protocol was more important. And for whatever reason, this either wasn't working, or maybe it even had 2 networks. And one of them was maybe an older network, and it had to connect to that as well. So it looks like they had an adapter card for that. Am I going to put it back in? No, I'm not, because I don't need that extra protocol, and I definitely don't need 2 network connections in this machine. So I'll probably pop that on eBay or keep it as a spare, and just free up a little bit of space in the machine. So yeah, that won't be going back in. Ah yes, the Adaptex SCSI card. As I said earlier, I have an Adaptex SCSI card. That's going to plug into one of the 2 PCI slots here. That's going to give us an internal SCSI header, and that will allow us to put a SCSI hard drive in this machine. Now, I'm not going to use a real SCSI hard drive. As I said in our video that preceded this, we would have looked at, whether the SCSI hard drive replacement card, the blue SCSI, is a decent replacement. Is it going to have some kind of major advantage over IDE? And if it is, then we're going to use the SCSI cable to connect from this card over and to the hard drive. And I'm probably going to put the hard drive into the bay where the hard drive would have gone originally. But that card also gives us a SCSI connector on the back of the machine. And I've also ordered a blue SCSI external SCSI drive, which is really cool. So what that means is I will be able to transfer stuff onto this machine by plugging that drive into a Windows PC, dragging files onto that drive, then hopefully transferring files into here. Even better, I have a zip drive. What that should allow us to do as well, hopefully, is to actually use zip disks and I can connect my SCSI zip drive to this machine, and in that way also transfer over files. Now, in a modern PC, Windows 10 PC or Windows 11, you're not going to have a SCSI connector, but I do actually have, I recently bought a USB-based zip drive as well, so I have both types. So I can actually connect that hopefully to a Windows PC, a modern one, and use that as a way of transferring files to this machine. So that's going to be really cool. This obviously has to go back in. This is the riser card, which has the 2 PCI and 8-bit and 16-bit ISO slots there. So that definitely obviously will be going back in. Okay, so that's it for the overview about what we're actually going to do in this video. We're going to try and put all of those things in, upgrade what we can, replace the fans, test out the different hard drives. So it's a very busy video. So I think we should now crack on and actually start to get the fans ready. I think we'll get the fan ready for the power supply first, and we'll install it on the power supply ready. Obviously, we'll make sure that it's blowing in the right direction. And then we'll get the other fan ready to go on the side of the case. We'll test it then, make sure that we get good airflow, and then we'll install that. And then there's a lot of other things to do. So let's do that now. Let's get this machine back together and fully working again. So I'm just going to show you here quickly what I did with the fans. I needed to get replacement fans in because the previous one broke. I decided to use Noctua Redux fans. You can see this one here. This one is an 80 millimeter. I think I used one which was an 80 millimeter and 110. I think it was, because I think the PSU required that. And you can see here that I'm actually getting ready to solder up the wires. I'm just tinning the live and then the neutral, obviously the neutral wires, ready to solder on the other wire. And this is actually a recovered piece of wire from the original machine. So it's got the connector to actually connect up to the motherboard there. I'm just flexing up the 2 wires on the Noctua, making sure that the live's got some tin on there. And then the slightly awkward process where you have to basically heat up both wires and try and get the solder to bind on both of them. So you can see I'm just going to do that now. And if you pay attention a little bit further down the cable, you see I've actually got some shrink wrap there, and that's ready to go over each individual wire. You see I'm actually getting that into position. And then I'm just going to use the heat from the soldering iron to shrink wrap into the right size. It's a little bit slower than using a heat gun, but it saves me having to actually get the heat gun out just for this, because I don't have a workbench. Then I'm just going to slide over the thicker piece of shrink wrap, and then I'm going to do the same process again to then get that so it basically constricts on the two separate pieces of wire, so we get a nice, neat looking result. And that's one fan basically done. There we are, ready to go. And I'm getting out the second fan. And I'll take this opportunity, I'm not going to explain the whole process again on this, except that I will say that there are a couple of extra wires on this fan because it can be controlled by a signal, but the only wires you actually need are the black and the yellow. So this is going to run potentially at 12 volts. These are 12 volt fans. That would mean they would run at full speed. And I was a little bit worried about that, so I was considering putting a resistor in series in this cable, and that would actually then allow it to run at about 5-6 volts, something like that. But I did actually measure the voltage on the logic board, and I tested these out by just touching them to the logic board wires, you know, the terminals, and I found that the fans were running actually at about half speed. So it looks like there's something already in the logic of the board that actually takes the full 12 volts and tones it down to about 5 volts or something like that. So I found both of these fans actually run at about half speed, which is great because they make less noise. There's still decent airflow on them because, you know, they're Noctuas and they're pretty good. So yeah, on this occasion, I didn't need to use the resistor trick, and that's why I'm just soldering these wires up straight. So I've got the PSU fan soldered up. I'm just trying to put it onto the little rubbery nipples there. And I found that they were just falling through. So that was a bit of a pain. So I obviously had to come up with a slightly different plan. So I decided that I was going to get a pair of pliers. There we go, falling through again. Yeah, do this a couple of times until I realize that it's not going to work. And yeah, I think the plan now is to try and get some pliers and then pull them through, you see? So there we are, that's made that one pop into place. Now the same thing for the other one, just get it through, then pull with the pliers, that's locked in. And on the other side, unfortunately, the little rubbery nipples got torn off, so I decided that some hot glue would probably be the best technique here. Just putting some on the nipple there, and then just putting in at the side there, because obviously the other one's already glued down, and we're ready to go. Now we're going to put the power supply back in. You can see the fans there already on the PSU with its new cable, quite a long one. Here comes the logic board. Just move all the wires out the way, put that into the case, get that nestled in position. A little bit tricky this one because there are some actual clips on the logic board. I've got my little tray of screws there. And I found those clips were a little bit annoying, but I'm just getting my screws ready to put them in. And I'm finding that they don't actually align, I think. So yeah, just getting all my dominoes lined up here. And I'm just putting a screw into the power supply, so that's just locking the power supply in place. There it goes. And now I'm trying to put the screws in on the logic board. And it looks like they're going in, maybe. Yeah, the screwdriver needs magnetization, I think. Yeah, in they go. And they're going in quite nicely. And just carrying on, putting them around. And then I'm just tightening them up. Once I've got them all in position, lightly screwed in. I always do that, always get things in position before I start tightening things up. Putting the power cables in. These are all keyed, so they actually only fit in one position, which is great. And then I'm putting the fans in, as you can see, putting the power supply fan in. Now I've gone off to get the PCI riser card. There it is, and the Ethernet card. So I'm just going to plug that in position. There we are. Just getting that in there. That looks like it's fitting in there quite nicely. In goes the locking screw to hold it in place. Now the two serial ports, they go in the back. And I have to turn the machine around and prop it up because I need to actually put the locking nuts onto the two serial ports. Otherwise they actually won't stay in position. They'll just fall out of the machine. So yeah, just using my nut driver there to get those in. And same technique, make sure they're in loosely and then go back and tighten each one up when I know it's in the right position. There we are. the serial port is in. I'm just going to plug that in, find the header on the board, plug that in there. There we go. Serial ports are now go. In goes the PCI riser card. And now I'm putting in the CD-ROM analog audio cable there. Now I'm putting in the 2 RAM sticks, which will give us 64 megabytes of RAM, which is great. Decent amount of RAM for the day. And I'm putting the SCSI card in. At this point, this card would probably go in and out many times during the testing of the hard drives. You know, as I said earlier, watch that video if you can. The link is in the top right. Just trying to get that to go in. I found the bracket was a little bit annoying, and I found that with the PCI card as well. I put another graphics card in here, and I found it was quite hard to get it in, especially both of them at the same time. They tended to fight against each other. But anyway, that's in. The back of the machine is now looking great. Yeah, I think we're doing pretty well. Putting the badge back on. So now for the CPU fan. Now this was a little bit awkward because the cowling for this got exploded basically by the person that sent it to me. So I'm having to use, unfortunately, cable ties. And you can see I've done the left top cable tie. Pay attention to that because that comes back to bite me later. But right now it's going pretty well. I'm just trying to work out exactly where I can put the cable ties through so that the fan is held onto the metal case there in a reasonable position. And I had to make sure that the fan actually worked correctly as well. At this point, I realized I had an issue with the chassis where the hard drives actually go into the machine. Originally, it was obviously designed to take a full-size 3.5-inch hard drive, but that wasn't the case anymore. So I knew I would have to make some changes there. And I also took a little moment to put in the CD-ROM drive. I put that into its metal chassis and tried to fit that. And I found there was an issue there as well. So looks like I need to make an adjustment. So let's just have a look at that now. So before putting this back together, I had to make a few changes. And well, this was the simplest one here. Do you see that cable tie there? Well, that's actually new. I had to clip that off because I found out that there's a little flange here that this drive caddy actually slides down, this piece of metal. And I originally had this actually tied around here, around this edge, and you couldn't actually slide that down with that in position. So obviously I had to cut that off, and I repositioned it to here, and it's absolutely fine. So that's great. So the next one is the hard drive caddy. So back in the day, do you see those 3 little nubbins there? For some reason, the 4th one is missing. Don't understand why that is missing, but the hard drive would have sat in this position, actually facing the other way around. I'm showing you it like this because I've got the cable attached here, so it just makes it too difficult to... it's actually meant to come in through here with the cable attached. Bit awkward, to be honest. But anyway, it will fit on those nubbins. So let me just try and put that in position. There we are, like that. And that's where the hard drive sat. But obviously now it's much smaller and there's no screws to hold this down. So what I've done is I've taken the top part of this caddy and I've applied some foam. Do you see? And originally this would have been actually to absorb sound. There isn't actually any sound anymore to absorb. But what I've done is I've layered up the foam. I hope you can see that. And the idea is that when this is actually in position, so this will actually fit on like this. So yeah, when that's actually in position and pushed home, that foam will push down on the card and we'll just hold it in position. There's a little gap here at the front where the cable can actually come out. So that's hopefully going to work fine when we get it all in. I'm going to have to do this obviously with my hands free when I do this. It's very, very fiddly. So I have to put the cable through here. And there's one little surprise, which is on the underside, I've actually used the same foam and I've applied it to the SSD. Hopefully you can see that there. I put 2 pads of it, one at the front and one at the back. And that's just to give it a little bit of clearance away from the metal. And now originally, I didn't quite anticipate this, but I put this much further towards the front because I thought it'd be much easier to have the cables going in if they're almost immediately there presenting themselves. But it turned out that when you did that, you couldn't actually put the floppy drive in correctly. This space here is very, very tight. So I'm still a little bit worried about the cables going through there. But it's the only place I could really put this drive. Now this is actually the main system drive. And the top bay is where I'm actually going to be putting the blue SCSI. It doesn't really matter which way around they go, obviously. But I thought it made sense because this has the nubbins and the blue SCSI has the actual bracket that fit on there. So I put that in there. And then this one here would normally have an adapter, which would then fit it into this bay here. I don't have an adapter. This is extremely light. I mean, it feels like it's made of aluminium and plastic. So I thought some double-sided sticky tape and this foam, which is quite plastic. I don't know if you know that type of foam that has quite a plastic surface to it, quite waterproof kind of. Anyway, it sticks really well. So yeah, I did originally have it here, but then I had to move it to here. So hopefully when we get that in position, it's going to go here in the case. That's going to work out really well. You know, we've got the massively long SCSI cable there. That's going to go through the middle. Then the drive folds over and goes in this direction. And the other drive is going to be underneath. Access is pretty horrible, to be honest. You know, once I put this back together, I won't want to be taking this apart very often. I just thought I'd show that to you before I carry on and put it back together. Okay, with that little bit of explanation out of the way, let's actually get to putting it together. So the first thing I need to do is get that cable through the hole there and get the drive onto the little nubbins there. And now I'm just trying to get the case to clip on. And I did check beforehand that the foam wasn't going to actually sit on the Raspberry Pi because we don't want that to get obviously overheated. I actually made sure that the foam sort of fitted on either side of it beforehand. Right, this is the really tricky bit now. We've got to get everything to go in and just making some little adjustments there. Realize that the analog audio cable for the CD-ROM isn't actually plugged in, so let's get that sorted out. Make sure it's seated in there, and I'm basically trying to line up my ducts here. I'm trying to make sure that I can actually get all the cables to go to where they're meant to be, and I'm just plugging in the ID cable there and the power into the SSD drive, the SATA drive. Orienting the chassis backwards so it goes in, and that actually popped out, so I popped that back in again. Not sure why that popped out, to be honest. And now I'm just getting that really massive SCSI cable sort of organized. It's horrible because it's just getting in the way of everything, and I'm just sort of feeling out how it will all fit together once it's in place. Bit of a tangle there with the SCSI cable, trying to work out what I'm going to do with it. Plugged it in there into the card, tucking it in there. The airflow is not going to be great, you know, because of that cable. But there we go. That's all I can really do. And I've just realized that I haven't actually put the screws in for the floppy drive, but luckily the chassis is just loose enough that we can actually slide that in there and get the screws put in. So that's great that I realized that in the nick of time. Just putting the screws in. A little bit awkward. I do need to magnetize these drivers. Just make my life a bit easier if they were magnetized, I think. There we go, nice and snug. Now I've turned it around and I'm going to get the chassis sort of laid in there, make sure it's sort of sitting nicely. And I'm just going to plug in the floppy cable, making sure I got the orientation correct. Luckily it's keyed. And there goes the power connector as well. And I think we're good. And now I'm going to put on the case. So this case is not great. It does work, but it's a little bit fiddly. The trick is you've got to make sure that it fits in two little rails on either side of the machine. And if you don't do that, you end up doing what I do, which is fiddling around with it quite a lot. And I think at this point I've got it worked out. So I'm just making sure that the floppy disk actually works. Looks like it does. So we're just going to put in all the different peripherals. Now I'm actually using a set of headphones here as speakers because there's not enough room really on the table to put some speakers. And I've nestled the microphone in there in between. And it's turned on, which is great. You can see there it's actually booting up. I'm just getting ready. Skip the massively long Windows 98 loading sequence. Logged in, and I'm just waiting for Windows 98 to be ready for me to do something. And I'm just going to go over and load Eye of the Beholder, which was a favorite game of mine back in the day. I've got a bit of a soft spot for computer role-playing games. So just need to choose VGA here and Sound Blaster, and off we go. We're into Memory Lane, an amazing game from Westwood Studios. Yeah, Eye of the Beholder. And I'll just leave this playing here for a second, just so you can enjoy its DOS music glory. And it had a really nice intro, typical for the era. You know, there was no FMV. This game came out in 1990. No FMV at this point, but we did have these nice handcrafted intros using bitmaps and animated bitmaps, moving things around using transparency, things like that. Very much of its time. Fantastic VGA graphics on this game. It was a bit of a triumph of its age, really, and it really sort of created a new level in terms of sort of first-person dungeon crawls. Yeah, really great game. I really like this section where you show the different characters, you know, picking up their weapons, the dagger, you know, the spell book, the sword of the warrior, and then the cleric praying, getting ready to go into the dungeon. Then they trundle back out again, and they're off to the dungeon. Now a little pan down. Quite exciting for the time to be seeing a bitmap that large, panning down to it. And then our heroes are into the dungeon, and all of a sudden they are trapped. Oh, the drama. Yeah, wonderful stuff. So here we are. I find myself at the end of another long renovation journey. Actually a little bit stressful in the middle there. I didn't know if this machine was going to be repairable, but it was. Luckily, in the end, it turned out to be something relatively innocuous. Just the BIOS had managed to have a bit of bit rot. And we were then lucky to obviously find that BIOS online. I honestly thought I was not going to find it. It's a very long time since this machine was made, and it's not a very common machine. And it's an actual one-off BIOS by ICL. So yeah, if they didn't have it, I don't think anybody else would have had it. So yeah, we were very lucky that Fujitsu actually still host those files online. I found that quite surreal, to be honest, that 26 years after this machine was made, they were still hosting the BIOS and the other files, but there we go. That was great. So where do we find ourselves now? Well, we have a machine with Ethernet. I actually have this connected. I'm going to try out using FTP to transfer files onto this machine. That'll be an interesting thing to see if I can get going. It works with Windows 98 and DOS games. We've already tried those out. We saw Eye the Beholder. And we're going to close out this video looking at the intro to Eye the Beholder 2, which has got another really good DOS intro, and I thought it would be fun to leave you with that. I'm using a set of Harman Kardon Soundstick speakers. I think it's Soundsticks 2. And the reason why I have these speakers is these are probably more associated with Apple Macs. But in fact, if you look at the box, it does say Macintosh and PC. So obviously they work in either machine. It's just a normal connection on the back, 3.5mm jack. So it's nothing you know, esoteric about them actually. Back in the day, these would have been very high end. I think these are actually from the early 2000s, so a little bit later than this machine. But what's really great about these speakers is they have a subwoofer, which I wouldn't have experienced back in the 90s. You know, things back then were a little bit more rudimentary in terms of sound, unless you had a great deal of money. And I didn't have a great deal of money. So this was definitely high end at the time. I've tried it out with this machine and it does sound fantastic. I actually bought it because I was thinking about getting some speakers which were very typical for the time. Something like Roland speakers. I don't know if you remember those. They were kind of typically beige, boxy design. But I already have a set of these speakers actually for a Mac. I bought them for, I think it's a G4 Cube, because they're perfect for that, or a machine of that era, you know. And I know that they're very good quality speakers, and I thought, well, you know, they're definitely in the running to be a speaker for this PC. I went online and I did a quick check, not thinking I was going to see anything much. I actually saw a set of these for sale for £39, boxed in mint condition, fully working. And I couldn't believe it actually when I saw that. So I actually did my usual thing, which is to swoop in at the last moment and put in a bid. And I got it for £1 more than the previous bid. I got it for, I think it was on £38 and I got it for 39. So I was so happy when I got this, and a few days later it turned up. It was in great condition. Nothing had happened to it coming to me. So that's really fantastic. It works great. You're going to see that hopefully at the end of this video. The sound probably won't come across obviously because I'm using, you know, this kind of microphone, which is mono. I've tried to actually record it from 2 different positions in the room, and I'm going to try and blend that together to see if it, you know, gives any sort of sense of stereo separation, but I wouldn't hold my breath. But anyway, we'll see. Where are we with this PC? So we've got an SSD in there, SATA SSD, and that's the main system drive. And we also have a SCSI drive in there as well, a blue SCSI V2, which gives us also, the adapter for that gives us a SCSI port in the back, which means we can use zip drives and other SCSI peripherals with this machine in the future. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to use that. So I'm really happy that I've managed to get that in there. I've actually got another graphics card, which I alluded to earlier on in this video, and it's a Voodoo 3. It's actually installed right now. The reason why I did that is because obviously I don't want to keep on taking the case off, put it back on. But we'll look at that, I think, in another video, because this video is obviously quite long already. And we're focusing, I think, more on just having the machine basically working here in this one. And we'll look at 3D acceleration in another video, I think, because it's a topic unto itself, isn't it, really? In that video, I'm probably going to look at games like Quake and Carmageddon, classic 3D games of that era where you're moving away from DOS and accelerated 3D to Windows 98 XP, where you do have acceleration. And in that era, it's quite interesting because acceleration is not easily won. You have to generally jump through a few hoops to actually get acceleration working. Carmageddon is a good example. It's a bit esoteric how you actually get that working with the Voodoo 3 card. But it'll be interesting. We'll have a look at that, and that'll be quite cool for another video. So yeah, that's it. I mean, basically, we've gone from a very dirty working machine to a clean machine that didn't work to a clean machine that does work. And it has this fantastic sound system. So I'm looking forward in the future to having a really nice place where we can put this on display, hopefully permanently. And I'm sure it's going to give me a lot of pleasure, and maybe some friends if they pop round. I'll definitely, obviously, want them to have a go on this wonderful machine. I'm so happy that I've actually got the ICL machine that I wanted back in the day. Working for ICL, I used to see these machines going through my hands quite every day, basically, but I couldn't really afford them at the time. So it's really lovely all these years later to actually have an ICL machine with this really nice styling made by Nokia over in Finland. Yeah, it's a wonderful machine, really. CD-ROM, it's got these Harman Kardon sound sticks too for sound. It's got a Voodoo 3 in it. I think the only thing which is maybe a little bit weak is the sound. It's that crystal chip, which, to be fair, actually doesn't sound too bad. But I do have an OR64 value ordered. Now, I know OR64 golds are the ones that everybody wants, but they are becoming very expensive. I think the cheapest one I saw was £150. And when you consider that I've already got working sound in this machine, I don't really want to pay that much. But I did find an OR64 value, which is basically the first iteration of the card, which was later rebranded as the value. It only has 512K of sound for MIDI sound fonts, but it is expandable. So that might be interesting in another video, putting that in and getting that to work. And I want to evaluate it first. I want to see if I really, think that the MIDI sucks and that I really do want to outlay the extra money. You have to get a daughter card for it. You have to buy a SIM. There's a bit of fiddling around going on to actually get that upgraded, but it is a possibility. So what would that would actually give me then is an OR64, effectively a gold. I think it doesn't have quite the same RAM DAC, but apart from that, everything's the same. So yeah, I'm going that route. I'm going the cheap route with future expandability. So yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed this series. I know I enjoyed it a great deal, and the outcome's fantastic. And if you did enjoy it, please like the video, click on the like button, because if you don't click on the like button, other people aren't going to see this video and all this work. It's not for naught, but I would love other people to see this video and enjoy it, as you hopefully have. And if you did enjoy it, please subscribe to the channel, because I'd like to see you back here again for other videos. There are going to be further videos in this series on the ICL. It's the ICL Ergo Pro, but I'm thinking of it more as a kind of DOS era gaming PC. So yeah, I think there's a lot more in this, field. I mean, there are so many DOS games. Definitely something that we have to explore in the future. Absolutely. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'll hopefully see you in the next one. But for now, take care.